let's move on to Michigan basketball as we wrap things up here. Juwan Howard and Jon Sanderson situation. We got more details on that midweek. Jeff Goodman with his reporting on the Goodman and Hummel podcast, and then Brendan Quinn of The Athletic writing pretty lengthy report on what he's picked up from that. Our Chris Ballas and yourself have weighed in with a couple columns on this, so people can go check those out as well. But kind of just our thoughts as we do have a couple key details that we didn't know on Monday that we've now gathered. Basically, the one that really stood out to me reading Brendan Quinn's report was the fact that Jon Sanderson filed a claim with Michigan HR, and the fact that this thing is, as of Wednesday afternoon, still going through an HR review and still pending. So Juwan Howard is at Mott Children's Hospital. He was earlier in the week, giving gifts to the kids there. He was out on the recruiting trail on Tuesday night. He's operating business as usual, but this thing's still under a review. And, it sounds like him and Sanderson were chest to chest, yelling at each other, and had to be separated. Kind of goes along with the initial report said with this situation before practice last Thursday. But your thoughts on kind of just the new details that have emerged? Because I'll say this to start off the discussion. I think that the fact that Jon Sanderson went to HR, I'm not blaming him for it, certainly. But just the fact that this wasn't able to be handled within the program or really within the athletic department behind closed doors speaks to a larger issue, potentially to what he allegedly said about the culture, quote unquote, being the way that it is. It's just not a good sign.
Yeah, to me, and again, I have to be really careful just in general on our behalf of just not speaking out of turn, but my read on the situation is that something was said that crossed a line. That wasn't just a dispute among colleagues, coworkers pertaining to basketball matters or things like that.
And those are the missing details. Those are the important missing details. Yeah.
And that's just me. That's me completely speculating. I
agree with you, though. I agree with you.
You can think of the reasons in your regular job or our job or anyone else's job why HR would get involved. It's usually because something inappropriate was said or a line was crossed.
Thank God we don't have HR. Thank God.
Well, not we do. Not directly at the Wolverine. We do have overlords that oversee and we report to now. But to me, it's clear that a line was crossed somewhere. And yeah, Juwan Howard was out doing his job this week because he wasn't suspended from doing his job. No one was suspended from doing their jobs. Jon Sanderson apparently stepped away voluntarily while this thing was going on. I don't know. I mean, we only know these people in a professional capacity. We're not close with either of them. Having had a few conversations in the past with Jon Sanderson, he's always been a gentleman, always been polite, always been kind to me personally in those conversations that we've had, but doesn't strike me as a guy that would go scorched earth or sour grapes over a regular workplace dispute. So for me, it all kind of comes down to this, is that when you look at this situation, which apparently started with Jace Howard, and Clayton, you can correct me, did he not show up for treatment? Did he show up late? What exactly was Jace Howard's role in this?
So I don't know exactly what he was frustrated about, but I think he was just kind of frustrated in general. Obviously, he hasn't played this year. I think Brendan Quinn may have wrote something like he was frustrated that he hasn't been cleared yet. He's obviously dealing with the leg injury. So maybe it was that, and he was kind of letting the trainer have it, which is obviously inappropriate if true.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me just say it too, like there's no side to take here. I think everyone here was emotional and frustrated and in the wrong. Now, it's a far cry, it's a far cry from the initial reporting or the initial buzz that was maybe it got physical. I think you could still probably argue that getting chest to chest with someone is physical. Like there is like a personal space.
And people holding back and separating. Yep.
Yeah. When you have to be separated, that's just, you don't get kudos just because you didn't throw a punch. I guess maybe Juwan Howard would, given the past. But again, without going for the, swinging for the low-hanging fruit or things like that, to me, this is not normal or acceptable from anyone who purports to be a professional or a leader within an organization. Obviously, Juwan's already under the microscope for what's happened in the past. And all of this too, like it's not a fireable offense for anyone on the surface as one incident, but I don't think anyone can argue that when we're already having conversations about the culture being fractured or the attention to detail just not being where it needs to be on so many levels. You know, it seemed like the initial rush of information was a little bit overblown, but having a longtime staffer, I think Jon Sanderson's been here for 15 years, clash with the guy who this is now year 5 for Juwan Howard. Like this isn't normal, right? And the fact that I don't know how long these reviews take, but that's not really normal either. I don't
Michigan
know.
Michigan does not work on a timeline that is really used anywhere else in the world.
No, they do not on a number of fronts.
And maybe the government, but
that's a separate issue entirely on both of those levels. But the fact that we are sitting here having this conversation, it's embarrassing. It's not where you want to be. The fact that it happened in earshot of people, it happened in front of the team. Kudos to them for even being able to come out and coming out and performing the way they did on Sunday. But you know, absent of, and I wrote about this the other day, and my rant will end here after this. Absent of turning this thing around and winning basketball games at a consistent, respectable level, if you're someone that's sitting here asking what we're even doing here right now, I mean, what's the point of any of this? I think we're getting closer. I already felt like we were kind of getting close to maybe hitting that reboot button on this entire operation. And to be frank, this feels like something that might expedite that.
For sure. I mean, it may expedite it after the season. It also, I mean, when you're sitting here talking about, and I think it's important to bring up that he has a zero tolerance policy, excuse me, right now after what happened at Wisconsin in 2022. So, I mean, this is under a review from somebody who's not involved, somebody that didn't hire him. You know, this is under the HR department's review, where I think all bets are kind of off when you look at that policy being in place for Juwan Howard. So whatever they find, if they find that as a strike on his record, I don't know what happens in the short term.
Yeah. Again, once HR gets involved, you are beholden to a totally different set of circumstances and standards than you might be if it was just, you know, Ward Manual needing to hear out what happened or something along those lines. So we'll see, but I'm going to be really interested in knowing, like, maybe we might not ever know what was actually said, but that Jon Sanderson went to HR to me does raise a lot of, you know, it raises a lot of red flags about, okay, this might have been a little bit more than just two professionals arguing over the treatment schedule or a player's attendance or something like that.
Yeah. And Jeff Goodman did say that Jon Sanderson had kind of had some frustrations with the culture at Michigan for some time. So obviously that's not surprising given what happened and that he filed that claim. Michigan back in action on Saturday. You hope there's some sort of resolution here or that they get to the bottom of whatever, you know, I mean, I don't know how long it takes to do that, but before tip-off on Saturday against a terrible 5-4 Eastern Michigan team. Anthony, you and I were both at Little Caesars Arena last year when these two teams played. It was an exciting game. Amani Bates, Noah Farrakhan, those guys were playing well. Michigan was going back and forth. I mean, Michigan was down at one point, but this is not the same Eastern Michigan team. They just lost to Oakland. They've lost to North Dakota, Florida Atlantic, and Butler. Those are two quality, respectable losses, but it's not a good team. I think, you know, Michigan's favored right now by 20 on KenPom. What would you like to see from the Wolverines in this game? I think they'll probably win going away, but I mean, I think you want to see a little bit more that Terrace Reed is continuing to actually be on that upward trajectory, because what he showed the last game was fantastic. You know, I guess what else do you want to see out of this Michigan team?
Hopefully everyone behaved themselves on the sideline first and foremost. But I'm with you. I'd love to see Terrace Reed continue what we saw in the Iowa game. I mean, I think that was maybe an underrated step forward for him. Had kind of had a rough start to the season before that. I'd like to see that continue. Honestly, right now, this is going to sound so surface level and so cliche, but just to win in general, because you look at this stretch that they have coming up. They've got the game against Eastern Michigan. They're going to play in the Jumpman Invitational next week against Florida, which, I mean, that to me right now, that's a must-win game, given how the non-conference has gone for them. So, you have those games. You're going to play that tune-up game against McNeese at the end of December. There, that's
not as much of a. It's not as much of a tune-up game as I thought.
Well, it might not be, but you pay these teams for it to be a tune-up game. So. True. If they better win the game, right? So you look at that, like you need to win these next 3 and probably win the 2 that come after, with Minnesota at home and that game with Penn State at the Palestra. Because then all of a sudden you're sitting there at, what would it be, 10-5, and you're giving yourself a chance. If they can find a way to get to 18 wins by Selection Sunday, I think I saw, they would have, I believe, the last update that I put out, a 91% chance at the NCAA tournament. So this stretch of 5 games coming up, and then, a couple coin flip games into January before everything cranks itself up here in Big Ten play, it would be huge. So I just need to see them play 40 minutes of good, consistent winning basketball, because it seems like in the past, or at least you look back to last year, they'd have a game where they would figure it out and they'd be like, look, I told you we were good. And then the next 3 games would be right back to the stuff that, we saw that would frustrate us about that team. So to me, it's about bottling that performance from Sunday. Maybe play a little bit better defensively, but taking the good and packaging it together and actually carrying it over into the next game, because we haven't seen that really since the first 3 games of the season.